Alright, so first of all, we're going to start off with the red color in the color wheel. And over here, I have picked up a red, okay, from the color set and squeezed it in the smaller reservoirs in the center of the palette. Okay, about maybe you can squeeze a little bit more. We get about 1/10 cent size blob of paint in the center reservoir over here. Right, so you can pick up any red if you that you like from the color set. Doesn't matter, because this time around we are not mixing our own secondary colors. We're going to get the paints straight out of the tubes. For the first part of the color wheel, it should be relatively easy. We're going to just paint the first base color, okay, on the color wheel here. So there's no need to mix any colors yet. So I'm going to use a round tip brush, okay, because there are very fine edges here in the center of this section. You can either use size 12 or size 8. I would probably be using the size 8 over here. So same thing, we're going to wet the brush, pick up some paints, and paint away. Okay, so I would usually start by painting off the edges. Okay, control, just like when you're doing coloring books when you are younger. Okay, yeah, you usually paint or color the edges so that you don't go out of line. Okay, so I'm not trying to restrict you to be creative or artistically restrict you, but over here we're trying to practice and train yourself to be in control of the brushes. Okay, after that you want to paint any technically challenging pieces, it will be easy for you. Okay, so we can use the round tip brush as per mentioned previously. Use the round tip brush to paint the edges very nicely. Okay, just control and paint it within this pie itself. Okay, sometimes in class we call it a slice of pizza, right? Okay, so over here, same thing, this slice of pizza, I'm going to paint the edges very closely so that there's nothing that's popping out of the line, so that your entire color wheel can be very neat. Okay, so after we paint the edges, then you can fill in the rest of the larger areas in the center. Okay, so control your brush, control the amount of paint that you have on the brush. So what we're trying to achieve here is to paint this entire area with one solid uniform color. Okay, so the whole slice of red here should be nicely solid. Okay, you can probably even aim to cover out the printed words red here, because okay, if you can see, if it's thick enough, because acrylic paints are opaque, so you can actually cover out whatever is printed on the paper if you're painting thick enough. Okay, so we've covered all the edges. Okay, you can continue to fill out the entire space with your round tip brush, or if you want it to be a little bit faster, you can switch to a flat tip brush because it covers a larger surface area. So I'm going to pick out some paints using the flat tip brush. Okay, I'm going to let my round tip brush rest there. Okay, so you can pick up relatively large amount of paint on the flat tip brush, and you can brush it within the contours that you have already established with your round tip brush. And this flat tip brush can help you paint more evenly to get an even coat of paint on the paper, so that the colors, the tones, everything will be more evenly spread out as well, so that this whole slice of red will be nice and solid. Okay, so if you can see, the word red is more or less covered and blocked out already by the paints. So there you have it, we have the first part of the color wheel completed. Okay, so if you want, you can touch up a little bit. As a finishing touch, you can go over one more time to ensure the entire space is more evenly painted. Okay, great. Now moving on, I'm going to rinse off my brushes. Okay, Moving on, we are going to move on to the second ring of your color wheel here. So which over here it says add white, right? Okay, so we can take the tube of white paint. Okay, same thing, we're going to squeeze the white paint onto the center reservoir here, which is the smaller ones. Okay, not too much. We try not to squeeze out too much paints at one go, because acrylic paints tend to dry rather quickly. And once it's dried, you cannot reactivate it with water. Okay, once acrylic paints are dried, it is water resistant, so you cannot reactivate whatever paints that have been squeezed out and dried out. Okay, so if you can see, the white paint is here. Now, when we're mixing colors, we will consider how strong each color is, okay, and decide how much to take from, how much of each paint to take. So over here, between white and red, obviously the red color, okay, paint will be stronger than the white. So I would use my rinsed brush, and after dabbing it dry, I will pick up the weaker color first, okay, which is white. Okay, and this is what the larger reservoirs outside are for. Okay, pick out the white paint. Okay, and then if you want, you can rinse the brush first before you pick up the red paint. But sometimes, since the red is so strong, you might not really need to rinse the brush before you pick up the red paint. But let's play safe here. Okay, I've already rinsed the brush. Okay, so with a clean brush, we'll pick up just a little bit. Okay, because red is stronger than the white. Okay, so we don't need as much amount of red paint to mix with the white. Okay, in any case, we'll just put it into the larger reservoir, and then we'll mix together with the white. Okay, so you get a tint of red. So we'll mix it evenly first within this larger reservoir before we paint. Okay, so some of you might prefer to have a thicker or darker shade, darker pink. Okay, maybe this is too light for you, then you can go back and take out more red paint and put it back into the reservoir. So it's slightly darker now, but it is still lighter than the base red we started off with. Okay, so once you have mixed this amount of paint, try not to spread it too much within the reservoir itself, because once it spreads so thin, the paint will dry very quickly. So maybe try to mix in a smaller area within the larger reservoir. Okay, so once you've gotten a tint of red that you like, okay, set the palette down, then we can paint it within the second ring of your color wheel under red. Okay, so same thing. Now that we're using the round tip brush, paint the edges nicely and carefully. Okay, so remember, I'm still using only 3 fingers to control the paintbrush, so that your brush strokes are more nimble and more flexible. Okay, so over here a little bit more. Okay, if you need to turn the paper, okay, for better access to the edges, of course you can turn the paper around. So this size 8 brush is rather large for this size, for this area. So more or less, by the time I finish covering all the edges, the entire space is already filled up. So we might not need to have to use the flat tip brush here. Okay, so strive to paint neatly to show the control of your painting skills. Okay, so see, the entire tint area of the red is done, right? Of course, if you want to be a little bit more perfect, you can go back to use your, since we have more paint here anyway, okay, you can go back to pick up your flat tip brush and then brush across the entire area to make it more even. even out the entire tone. And so if you have noticed, even though this color is very light, okay, it's a tint of red, which is like a pink color, you can see the words, okay, the wordings are also covered up. That add white in brackets is gone. Okay, so you should have your base color red, and after adding white to red, you get the tint of it. So this is like a pinkish color. Okay, so that brings us to the outermost ring, whereby you need to add black color to the base red color. Okay, so same thing, I'm going to rinse my brush. Okay, the brushes are rinsed, and now back to the palette. We still have the red. The white is more or less used up, so now we need to squeeze out the black paint. Onto the center, one of the center reservoirs. Now paint, same thing about how strong the color is. Black is very strong, so we don't have to squeeze out so much. It's just a very smaller blob. Okay, less than half the blob of red that you actually squeezed out earlier on. So your paints of your paints come in a very small tubes, so let's not waste them. So just squeeze out a little bit. You can squeeze out more if you need. Okay, so same thing. Now back to the strength of the colors. Now we're going to mix red with black to get the shade. Okay, so which is a stronger color? Okay, consider that, and I would decide that black will definitely be a stronger color. So instead of taking black first, I'm going to pick up the weaker colors first, which is red in this case. Okay, as differed from just now what we did. Okay, just now we picked up the red first. Okay, because sorry, just now we picked up white first, because white was the weaker color compared to red. Now between red and black, the red is a weaker color, so I will pick up the red first. Okay, you can pick up quite a bit. Okay, since this is the last part of the red that we're going to use, you can pick up more of the red. And then since black is so strong, I may not want to rinse my brush. There's no need to. Okay, so I'm just going to pick up just a little bit of black. Okay, just in case it gets too dark, just a little bit of black first, like that. Okay, then I'm just going to mix it within the larger reservoir and see how it goes. Okay, not enough black, so let's get the excess paint off the brush first before I pick up more black. Okay, something like that. Then okay, it should be significantly darker than your base red color already. One thing to note is that acrylic paints tend to dry a little bit darker than it is when it is wet. Okay, so mix it evenly. You should get a brownish color, and this will be a shade of red. Okay, so once you're satisfied, once the paint is evenly mixed, you can start painting on the outermost ring of your color wheel for red. Okay, there's excess paint here. Let me mix a little bit better. Okay, so same thing, using the round tip brush, I'm going to paint neatly the contour and outline of this section. Okay, so I'm spreading out the brush a little bit so that I can see the paint is even at the tip of the brush, so that I can control how far the bristles go and make sure the bristles stay within the lines of this boundary of this section where we paint the shade of red. Okay, if you find it a little bit challenging to control such a big sized round tip brush, you can of course switch to, you still have the size 4 round tip brush that is a lot smaller and finer, so you can use it to paint the edges and the tips. Just continue using size 8 to paint the edges. Up to you. So if you find that the thinner, finer brush works in your favor, please change the brush that you're using to the finer one so that you can control your edges better. Okay, so same thing, paint the edge here. It's a curved edge, so just watch the edge of the bristles touching the outline of this section, and of course maintaining the thickness and wetness of the paint so that you can get clean edges as per what we practiced using your first worksheet earlier on. Okay, so practice control over the thickness of your paints. And of course the brush. Now the whole reservoir is getting a little bit dry, so I just added a little bit of water to the reservoir such that the paint can be wet enough to create clean edges. Okay, so I just realized the this outermost ring where we create shades is probably the largest surface area of each color. Okay, so when you're mixing the paints, you might want to create a larger amount of this shade so that it can last and cover the entire space here. Okay, so this shade is really dark, so it shouldn't be a problem for you to cover up the words in the template itself that says add black in brackets. Okay, so you can see that the labeling is gone already. Okay, so watch closely when you're painting. So there you have it. We have the entire red color section on the color wheel done, with adding white to the red, okay, which we'll call the base color, and then black to red, which is the base color. Okay, so similarly, if you still want to make it even more perfect, we can take out your flat tip brush. Okay, take whatever remains of the shade, okay, then brush it through. Okay, just very lightly brushing over and hover over the surface of the paper, so that you don't press down too hard and then ending up spreading out the paint too thinly. Then it will reveal the base, the paper that's underneath the paint itself. So don't spread it out too much, just very lightly brushing over. Okay, so maintain the consistency in the tone. Okay, so we have the base color red, the tint of red color, and the shade of red color. Okay, so 1, 2, 3 parts of each color. So we're going to move on to the rest of the different colors. We have other primary colors, yellow and blue, okay, and then the secondary colors, orange, green, and violet. So we're just going to move on and paint to fill up the rest of the color wheel. So we're going to start with yellow. If the water in your container is too dirty, okay, and then you're going to paint something so weak and light such as yellow, you might want to consider changing water so that your yellow later on doesn't get polluted by all the reddish water that you have in the water container. So I'm going to check after I rinse in this container of reddish color water. I'm going to rinse the brush, dry it on the cloth, and see whether the water is tinted with red or not. So far I think it seems okay. So I'll pick up the yellow color, the yellow paint, using my round tip brush. Same thing, we're going to paint the edges first, get it nice, nicely painted and defined using my round tip brush, which has a very sharp tip, so that I can paint the edges and the corners of this slice of color here. Okay, so paint the edges neatly. even if the yellow color is very light, okay, you will see that if you apply it thick enough, you should be opaque enough to cover up the printed wordings here, which says yellow. Okay, so we take a little bit more paint to finish off the edges here. Okay, so if you want to paint thick, okay, you can take out a little bit more paint, just very lightly spread it across, very lightly brush it across the surface of the paper so that you're not spreading the paint too thin. And there you go, you can cover up the wording if you need to, if you want to. Okay, so even though this is a very light color, yellow, you can still use the paint's quality of being opaque and thick to cover up whatever's underneath, cover up the word yellow. Okay, so we have it here, yellow. And we're going to move on to add white. Okay, so looking at the palette here, you notice that just now the reservoir in the center there that was used to contain white color is not polluted, okay, because just now we used a clean brush. So it would seem that that was a good decision to have cleaned your brush before you pick out the paints, but we might need more, so I'm going to squeeze out more white paint in the center reservoir here. Okay, just a little bit more. So let's apply our knowledge of the strength of each color again. So between yellow and white, white is definitely the weaker color. So I'm going to use my brush to pick up the white, and using another large reservoir in the center here. I mean, it's not center, on the sides here. Okay, before we pick up, okay, I'm going to raise my brush. Before I pick up the rest of the yellow. Okay, so we're going to mix it together to get a tint of yellow. Very nice thin layer. Okay, so my consideration right now is that since this color is so light, if we want to cover up the wordings, we might need more paint. Okay, so probably I'm going to take a little bit more paint to mix a little bit more of this tint. So we're going to need more white. Okay, just a little bit more. Pick up more white. Okay, put it here. And rinse my brush, because I'm going to use the yellow again later on for the shade, so I will try my best not to pollute it. Rinse my brush, pick up more yellow paint, a little bit more, and then we'll mix it again so that we can get a substantial amount of tint light yellow to cover this area. Okay, so if you're satisfied with this tint, okay, set down the palette and we're going to paint. Okay, here we can see that the wordings are covered. You can paint it thickly so that you can cover the words. Okay, so to show that you are painting the correct way of using acrylic paints, all the wordings should preferably be covered up by the paints. So I should not be able to see or read the words underneath this layer of paint. Okay, so the words add white in brackets are covered. Okay, no more add white. Okay, so other than that, we are going to next use the black to create the shade of yellow. Okay, so we still have a bit of black here in the center reservoir, and as per mentioned, black is very strong, so we might not need to have more black paint squeezed out from it. But now between the black and yellow, yellow is the weaker one, so I'm going to pick out the yellow. Okay, so remember the last part of the color wheel, this part at black for the shades is a relatively large area, so you might want to mix more paint to create the shade. So I'm going to take out more yellow paint. Okay, so let's pick up more yellow paint and put it inside the large reservoir on the sides. Okay, so rinse the brush. Okay, pick up some black. Okay, and then mix. Oh, okay, you see the black, just a little bit of black can make a very big difference. So luckily I didn't pick up too much black. Okay, this is already rather dark. Okay, so I'm quite satisfied with this shade of yellow. I'm going to set down the palette and paint. It'd be good for you to mix enough paint for this, so that you don't have to remix and recreate another batch of the color or the paint, because it might not be easy to get back the same shade. I'll just turn the paper around so that it's easier to paint the arch here. Okay, so because this is a shade, it's a darker tone than the base yellow, it is so easy to just cover out the printed words in the background on the paper. Okay, so there you go, this is done, and we have the shade of yellow here just by adding black. So similarly, if you want for it to be a little bit more perfect, okay, we can take the flat tip brush and brush it lightly across the entire space again to get a more even tone. Okay, so since we have additional leftover paint, let's just go over very lightly to get an even coat of paint. Have a nice finishing. Okay, so there you have it. We have red, yellow. The next primary color that we're going to work with will be blue. Okay, but over here you can see that we have left two large reservoirs here. So consider the space that you have on the palette. So if I'm going to squeeze the blue out, okay, I can use the pure blue from here for the base color. Okay, and then I can use two of the reservoirs to create the tints of blue and the shade of blue. Okay, so I think we should have enough space here, so I'm going to move on, and there's no need for us to wash the palette as yet. Okay, so I'm going to squeeze out the blue. Okay, over here in the center reservoir, then I'm going to just use the round tip brush, size 8. Okay, size 8 brush. So same thing, try to rinse your brush and make sure that the water that comes off onto the cloth is not colored, not reddish, not yellowish. Okay, so pick up the base color blue and fill out the space here. Designated, okay, designated for blue color. By now you should be familiar with the drill. Okay, let's fill out and create clean edges of the section first. Turn the paper if you need to have better access to the edges. Okay, then we're done with this. Okay, so let's be a perfectionist and use a flat tip brush. Okay, to paint it. Go over another time to make it even. Okay, sometimes the thickness of the paint differs based on your brush stroke. So some parts are popping out, some parts are a little bit thinner and recessed. So using the flat tip brush, I can make it all even. Okay, so we have three nice primary colors: red, yellow, and blue. So now next we're going to do the tints. Okay, the tint of blue. So same thing, going back to the reservoir, which is still pure and not polluted by other colors. I can put out more yellow, more white paint on the reservoir, in the reservoir. Okay, so from here we can pick out and rinse the brushes. And so between blue and white, which is the stronger color? Yes, blue will be the stronger color. So I'm just going to pick out white first. Okay, into the larger reservoir here. And rinse my brush. To pick up the blue. Okay, just I think the blue is rather strong, so I'm not going to take out too much blue. Maybe slightly more. Okay, so put in the reservoir here. I'm going to mix the blue and the white paint. So try to mix and contain your mixture in the center of the reservoir so that you don't spread it out too much around the entire large reservoir. Then the paint will get very thin. It's more difficult for you to pick out the paints, and the paint will dry faster as well. Okay, so make sure all the paints on the brush is utilized to get an even tint here. Okay, we're talking about tint here. Okay, so I'm satisfied with this tint for blue, and okay, let's just turn the paper around. Okay, so we can paint the tint area for the blue. So notice throughout I didn't add water to the reservoir here. Basically the amount of water that is involved is just whatever is available and absorbed by the brushes. Okay, so the paints should be wet enough to be mixed together. Without adding too much water. I didn't ask you to add water to the reservoir so that you can mix the colors or mix the paints together. So technically you don't really need to add water as long as your brushes are damp. Okay, so we have this section of the blue tint done, and we'll go over with the flat tip brush again. Flat tip brush, paint it over to get a nice coat, nice finishing, smooth and even, and definitely solid. Okay, there you go, we have the tint of blue, the blue tint here. Okay, so now left with the last part for this section, we're going to use the black and blue together. So blue will be the weaker one, so I pick up the blue first. Okay, so same thing, this section will probably need quite a bit of paint, so I'm going to take enough blue paint, and it's my brush, and pick out the black. Okay, so black paint just a little bit, okay, then we're just going to mix them together. Okay, is this dark enough? Maybe not, then we can pick up more black. Okay, can afford to go a little bit darker, I guess. Let's pick up more black. Okay, since we're going to rinse this palette after this, because no more space in for the rest of the colors, so I'm just going to, I'm not rinsing my brush, so I'm just going to pick up more black directly without rinsing my brush. Okay, so I think this is a dark enough tone for the blue. Okay, so we're going to quickly paint over this section designated for the shade of blue. Okay. Sometimes I have to hold my breath when painting so that the brush strokes don't go out of hand or out of line. So you might hear me gasping sometimes because I was holding my breath. Okay, dark enough. So now we've completed the base color of all the primary colors, red, yellow and blue. Okay, and respectively their tints and their shades. Okay, in all these three rings of the color wheel. There you go, we have it, we're done. Of course, if you not forgetting, trying to be the perfect artist here. Okay, put in using your flat tip brush to brush across to make it nice and even. Okay, and we are done. Okay, so the color wheel for the three primary colors, red, yellow, blue, and their respective tints, pink and maroon or maybe brown, and then light yellow and this army green looking thing, the shade of yellow. We have the base blue, the tint of it, and the shade of it. So as you can see just now, when I was mixing the shade for blue, it really didn't look so dark. Okay, so now after it's kind of dried a little bit, it has gotten relatively dark. It's almost like black. Okay, so do take note, when acrylic paints dry, they tend to dry looking darker than it was when it was wet. Okay, so for now, before we proceed on with the secondary colors, green, orange, and violet, my palette has run out of space. So I'm gonna go do one round of clean out. Clean out your palette, go and get your water replaced with clean water, and then we'll continue with the rest of the colors. Okay, now we are back with a clean palette and a bucket of clean water. So please do not leave your brushes lying inside the container like that, okay, for too long, because once you leave them in the bucket, the water container for too long, when your brushes are rested in the water container like that, after a while all the bristles will get out of shape and get distorted, and then you'll be considered damaged. Then you need to get new brushes. Okay, so set the brushes out here. Okay, just lean them against the cloth that I have here. Okay, so now we have a little bit of a challenge here. Okay, so if you refer and take a look at your set of your paints, there is one secondary color that is not available straight out of the tube here. So we will need to mix our own secondary color here. When what color will that be? Okay, if you see, we do not have an orange color that's straight out of tube. Okay, but thankfully orange color is very easy to mix. Okay, so in order to get orange, we will need to mix yellow with red. Okay, so remember, we need to use this orange color that we're going to create in the base color here, and then to add white to it to get a tint of orange, and then need to add black to get the shade of orange. So when we are mixing this and creating this orange color, we will probably need to mix we need to produce quite a big amount of this orange color that we're going to use. So without further ado, we're going to squeeze out some yellow paint here. Okay, and then some red paint here in the center. So same thing, the red is a stronger color than yellow. We'll probably not need so much of the red. Okay, so we're going to mix these two. I'll pick up the yellow first, and then the red. Okay, so we're going to rinse first before we pick up the red, just a little bit. Red is very, very strong, so we try not to create such a reddish orange color, so we don't need so much of a red. So once you mix them together, you should get something like that. Very egg yolky kind of orange. So maybe you want to get a little bit more red. Up to you. Okay, that's your own preference on what kind of orange you want, but nothing too close to yellow, nothing too close to red. Okay, so we have this base orange that we can work with. So here we go, I'm going to paint this orange here. Okay, so orange being the secondary color that can be created with what we have just done with red and yellow. This orange position is in between red and yellow. Just try to make this color wheel as accurate and neat as possible. Later on for your project, you'll probably need to refer to your own color wheel for color theory. Okay, so the position of them of the colors are very important for color theory, so that you know that, for example, for complementary colors, they're situated directly opposite each other. So over here we can already see a pair of complementary colors created, which is orange and blue. Okay. Okay, this pair of complementary colors, orange and blue. Okay, so we're done with that. Using the flat tip brush, make it even. Okay, so we have the base orange. Let's see if we can cover up the words orange. Okay, thereabouts. Then we're going to mix this with white. Okay, so you should have enough orange. So taking the orange that you created, okay, pick out some of the orange into the larger reservoir, pick out some white, and you should get a tint of orange that you can paint here. Okay, as light as this orange tint is, the paint should be thick enough still to cover up the wordings. Okay, remember to add white words in brackets. They should be covered by the paint itself. Okay, there you go. Let's cover up a little bit more of the wordings. And then you can use your flat tip brush. Pick up the rest of the light blue, orange, tint of the orange, to do the finishing coat and brushing up and polishing. Okay, so there you have it, the tint of orange, and we are left with the black. Okay, to create the shade of orange. So hopefully in your base orange that you created, there's still enough. Okay, so we're going to use the base orange and add black. So where is our black paint? Oops. Okay, black paint in the center reservoir here. Okay, we're going to pick out some bit of the orange paint, put them here. Okay, and then rinse the brush. Okay, we want to save the black for the rest of the shades of the violet and green later on, so let's not pollute the black. Okay, so pick up a little bit of the black. Very strong color, but we have very little orange color, so let's not pick up too much of the black. Okay, so maybe this is enough. Yeah, just a little bit more maybe. Okay, so let's have an even dark orange. Okay, so why do we need to learn to mix all this? Okay, in recognizing the tints and shades of the colors that can be created by adding white or black to the base colors, which we can call hues. Okay, hue, H-U-E. Okay, the hue, which is the base color here. Okay, you can know what you need to add when you're painting and how to achieve the colors that you want. So over here, you can see that this orange, when added with black, gives you this very earthy tone that you might be able to use it for painting the earth, on the floor, on the ground, deserts or mountains or cliffs, or just basically sand color. Okay. Okay, so we have the shade of orange. So same thing, where's my flat tip brush? Okay, using a flat tip brush, pick out the rest of the remaining amount of the paint and brush it over. Okay, so we have orange, tint of orange, shade of orange. Now moving on to other secondary colors. Let's try green. Okay, between these two remaining secondary colors, green and purple, I will probably start with green first because I think purple, this violet is still stronger than the green, so I'm going to start with green first. Okay, so squeezing it in the reservoir in the center here. Maybe I'll just a little bit more. So please take note of how much paint you squeeze out. Do not waste the paint. Okay, so I'm going to start off painting the base color here, which is the next secondary color, green. Okay, so green actually can be achieved by mixing blue and yellow. So the green will be positioned in between the blue and the yellow. Use the very fine tip of the round tip brushes to paint the corners of all these slices of pizzas. So in this slice of green, use the very sharp tip to carefully paint and fill in the edges at the center here, where all the pieces and slices of pizza meet in the center. Okay, so this green is relatively dark. For those who are using the other set of paints, please don't use the super light green. Later I'll show you. I know the Omni set of acrylic paints, there's a very light lime green kind of color. Okay, we try to not use that. You can use the darker one. The lime green one will be too yellowish in a sense. Okay, so let's fill this out with this green. So you can see that this green seems to be rather patchy. Okay, you can see that it's quite patchy here and there because this is a very dark color. Okay, which means the inconsistency in the thickness of the paint will create this patchiness. So it should be very nice and thick so that the color will turn out very even. So what I'm going to do is, or what you can do is, okay, in order to get a very even and solid coat of this base green, you can use the flat tip brush. Since we have already outlined and defined the contours of this green section, okay, use the flat tip brush, okay, to very lightly coat another layer of paint over so that these tones become nice, solid and even. So very lightly just brush and stroke this layer of paint across, okay, on the surface of the paper. So you can go multiple layers, multiple coats to make it even. Okay, so don't press too hard. Once you press too hard, okay, when I press too hard, you see when I spread out the paint too thinly, okay, the paper underneath will reveal. Okay, so I'm gonna put in back another coat of paint so that it's nice and even. So try your best to make it even like that. Okay, so don't press. There's really no need to press. You're basically just spreading a layer of paint over the surface of the paper. Okay, so I think on camera it looks very dark. Okay, so this is a very dark green, but don't worry, we will be able to probably see the nature of this green color when we create this tint of the green. So using the white color, okay. Sorry, just now I think this white was a little bit polluted by the orange. I didn't rinse my brush earlier on, but it should be fine. Now we have more white paint. We are going to create the light green, okay, which is the tint of the base green that we had. Okay, so the weaker color first. Remember, always remember the weaker color first. Rinse the brush. Pick out the base color, green. Okay, the green is quite strong, so maybe you don't need so much of it. Okay, just a little bit. So you can see white and green. Maybe just a little bit more green. Like that. Then we can mix. It's a very nice pepperminty kind of color. Okay, so this is our green tint of the green. So we're going to add it in here in this section. Okay, so now you can see the nature of this green. Oops. Okay, kind of painted. Okay, so now maybe this is a good chance to let you know. Okay, so I just accidentally painted out of line, because yellow was painted earlier on. The yellow is more or less dried already, so now the green layer has gone over line. Okay, what you can do is, now that the yellow is more or less dried, the yellow should be quite water resistant, and then while the green paint is still wet. So use a clean wet brush. You actually can try to take the green away. Okay, so because the yellow has already dried, it's not going to mix with the green. So by diluting the green paint with water, you actually can wipe it off. Okay, so just a quick cleanup. Okay, so you see now the green is not over the line anymore because I just cleaned it out. Okay, because the yellow has already dried and is water resistant. Okay, so the tint of green is done. Nicely done. And there's still quite a bit of light green left here, which you're going to take your flat tip brush, pick up the remaining paint and do a polishing sweep over. And it should be nice and even. Okay, so we're left with the shade of green. So I usually will mix the colors with a round tip brush. It's easier, and so we'll get green into the reservoir here. Okay, before we take the black, which is a stronger color, remember. Okay, I think this green was already rather dark, so by adding black, it should be really dark, almost black. Okay, so you might want to add, okay, since it's the last mixture that we're going to have, use the green more to create a very dark green. I won't be surprised if it turns out looking just pure black, maybe almost like the dark blue over here. Okay, so it doesn't matter. You will actually be interested to see how both the shades, okay, on their own will look black, but when you put them side by side like that, later on you should be able to see the difference between the two blacks. Okay, the two blacks, they are actually not both black. Okay, they are just very dark shades of the respective colors, blue and green. Okay, so let's fill out this entire area with the dark green, the shade of green. This definitely can cover up the wordings perfectly. I don't think you can ever see the words again underneath this. Underneath this coat of dark green, the shade of green. Almost done. Just the edges here. Okay, done. Same thing, we're going to use the flat tip brush to go over very lightly. Okay, so remember this dark colors, don't brush them too hard. If you press them too hard, it will make the coat of paint very thin. Then you review the white paper underneath, then it's going to be patchy. Okay, so we're done with green. Now left with the violet. As I was saying, the other set of acrylic paint, try to use this darker green instead of this light green. Okay, this darker green, this light green is a little bit too light, too yellowish. But even if you do use the light green, there's nothing really wrong about that, so don't worry about it. So now we're down with violet. Okay, violet is also another color that looks rather dark. If you are using this set, okay, of paints, you need to mix your own purple color or violet by mixing red and blue. Okay, so if you don't have a tube of purple like this from this set of acrylic paints, you will need to mix the red and blue to get your violet. Okay, so I'm not left with a lot of reservoirs here, but I'm just going to squeeze out the purple in the center reservoir, the smaller one, and start painting away our last color on our color wheel, and which is our third secondary color. Okay. If you are mixing your own violet using blue and red, don't be surprised or don't be too disappointed if the violet turns out to be more brownish or more like a what do you call that, a maroon color. That's fine, because it's the nature of the two red and blue that you have in the set. It is not going to come out with a perfectly purplish looking violet when you mix these two paints together, so don't worry about it. Okay, but if you have this tube of purple, it'll be good. Straight from the tube, you get a nice purple. If not, it should be an interesting experience for you to be mixing your own secondary colors also using the red and blue. Okay, so which is why this violet is in between, okay, on the color wheel, in between red and blue on the color wheel, because those are the two primary colors that should get you violet. Spinning the whole paper around just to get the right angle to paint the edges. Okay, so same thing, you see this this violet is a rather dark color. If you don't spread it evenly, you will see that the paint will look very patchy. So very lightly, don't have to use much pressure at all. Just very lightly brush this coat of paint over the surface of the paper to maintain the consistency in the thickness of this paint. And as a result, the tonal value of this paint, as you can see visually, should be consistent and more uniform throughout the entire space here. Okay, so now we're done with that. We are going to create the tint. Okay, the tint of this violet, which I'm going to get more white paint here. Now I'm left with this reservoir. Okay, so this is talking about your palette management. Okay, so left with this space and this space. So I'm just going to use this space for the tints because it's a smaller area, so I don't need so much paint. So I'm just going to get the white, okay, and then add on the violet into this small space here. It's still possible to mix, don't worry. And there you go, you have a very nice lilac color, which is a tint of this violet that you have been painting for the base color. Okay, so this lilac color, very nice. Mix it evenly, then you can add into this space. Okay, so it's all done. Same thing, leftover paints can be used to polish out the entire area. Just make sure my brush is cleaned. Okay, leftover, gonna paint it over very lightly. And make it even with my flat tip brush. Nicely done. Okay, last but not least, we are going to add black to this violet. Violet, and black. Okay, so you should get a nice deep purple, like a brinjal color. and we add it to this space reserved for the last color we're going to paint, which is a shade of the violet. Before we finish off the entire color wheel. Okay, so the same thing's happening. So you see that this shade of purple, this shade of violet is very dark, and we don't have enough paint to make it thick and solid. So you see it starts to get very patchy. Then when I add a little bit more water, it becomes watercolory and too thin. So we're just going to get a little bit more violet with the black. Okay, just mixing a little bit more for us to work with. Okay. Okay, so there you have it. We are done with our color wheel in acrylic paints. Okay, so let's just do a recap. We have done firstly the red, yellow, and the blue, which are primary colors. Okay, and of course their respective tints by adding white and black. Okay, which will give us the shade of the base color. Okay, so all these base colors in the innermost ring, we call them hues. Okay, H-U-E-S. So in other words, I like to call them the base colors. Okay, so we work with the base colors, then we add in white to get the tints, and add black to get the shades. Okay, so please set your worksheet aside to let it dry. So once it's dried, you should get the final look of the colors. Then you can take a photo of the entire worksheet. Please do remember to write down your name, register number, class, and the date today. Right, so once you're done, once this piece is dried, you can take a photo of this together with the first exercise. Okay, I should receive the photo submission of both of this worksheet. Okay, worksheet 1, worksheet 2, and I look forward to your submission online. Thank you very much.